like touch my shoulder, it would touch my hair.
Starts now.
And I said, what the hell is that?
Spirits and More Radio starts now.
And welcome to another edition of Spirits and More Radio, where we talk about everything paranormal. This is a live broadcast, so you can call in with your comments and questions at 1-872-244-6787.
Turn down the lights if you dare.
And Spirits and More Radio. And it's another creepy night here in the studio, and a perfect time for vampires. I'm joined by my co-host for this show, Eric Van Leer. And you may recognize Eric from our first show. Eric is a paranormal investigator, and we're going to dive into the underground world of modern day vampires. Eric, are you a vampire fan?
Am I a vampire fan? Gotta be honest with you, the whole thing makes me a little nervous.
But you've enjoyed vampire movies for a long time, haven't you?
I have.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing that we're going to get into the history of it. But I have a very special guest with us tonight. He is a real-life vampire who resides in New Orleans and is actually the founder of the New Orleans Vampire Association. But before we bring him on to the show, I did want to get into what vampires are. And we talked about movies. Do you have a favorite vampire movie of all time?
Yeah, The Lost Boys.
Yeah. We had talked about that. I thought you were a Buffy the Vampire Slayer fan for a moment. And then I realized it was probably Lost Boys. I think I like Blade. That's probably one of my favorites. But I think
that was a good one too. But can't lose with Lost Boys. It has a great setting. Of course, everyone when they were younger was in love with Star. Jamie Gertz, she was gorgeous. And just the whole mythos of being immortal and living that lifestyle, hanging out in caves and being able to fly.
Yeah, I agree. That was really cool. That was a cool kind of introduction into vampires. And I think that probably all the guys or boys who were watching that thought that was a really cool movie. Of course, now there's a lot of romantic vampire films and TV shows. But, I just saw one the other night, and I think I told you about this. You haven't seen this film. It was Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter. You haven't seen that, have you? You know what? You laugh. It's funny. And I thought, what is this movie about? But when I saw it, it was really good. I really enjoyed it. It's the premise is basically that the Civil War was not really a war between the North and the South. It was a war between mortals and vampires. And so Abraham Lincoln has this history that ends up... Are we getting some noise there? Eric, is that on your end?
No, I just coughed.
Okay. I think we're getting some noise from maybe our...
Sounds like a coffin opening.
I thought that same thing. It probably was, and I will ask that because it very well could have been. But Abraham Lincoln Vampire Slayer, great film. I really suggest you see it because it's sort of action based, but it does have some really great scenes in it. And I think that's the thing. Our listeners, people who are listening to the show, you think about vampires. I mean, there's kind of these real classic things, no reflection in the mirror, no shadow sometimes, drinking blood, of course, and other things too, like wooden stakes. Isn't there some history behind like the type of wood or something that the stake that you're supposed to like stick into the vampire's heart?
Yeah, the hawthorn stick.
Is that a type of wood? I think it's probably type of tree or something, isn't it?
I believe so. It was said to have magical properties.
Huh. I don't think there's anything magical about a piece of wood going through someone's heart. I think any piece of wood would work. But, that's, and the thing is vampires really didn't come to be into what into sort of the Western world's mind until the Bram Stoker Dracula film really propelled that whole thing. But there was some stuff before that, and and the story before that was really sort of quintessential vampire story. Really, it was there was this little town, and this was in Eastern Europe, and the little town had a thing happening. This is like in the 1650s, and what was happening out there was people were having someone was knocking on people's doors in the night, and then what would happen is like if that happened to you, if someone knocked on your door, you would die within the next day. So
sounds like the Black-Eyed Children or Black-Eyed Kids.
I'm not familiar with that. But yeah, so someone would knock on the door, and then someone would die from that home. And the interesting thing is that as this sort of happened more and more, there was a woman, and her husband had died, and she claimed to see him appear in her window. And when he appeared in her window, he sort of smiled through the window at her. And and this guy's name was Jur Grando. And
right.
And so he had died, and the town had buried him, but there were these sightings of this guy showing up around the town in the nighttime. And this went on for 16 years until finally the priest in the town who had actually buried him, what happened was that guy and a couple other people supposedly ran into Jur and confronted him. And they tried to run a stake through his heart, but it bounced off. And then from that point, what happened was they eventually went to dig up his coffin. A group of 7 to 10 people came out to dig up his coffin. And when they pulled him out, they said that his body was still looked youthful. And they actually, someone brought a saw and began to saw his head off, and his corpse began to scream. And so, and so they sawed his head off. And from that point forward, the priest actually did like an exorcism, like some prayers and so forth. And from that point forward, there was no more incidents happening in the town at night. So that's really the first recorded use of the word vampire and someone who's undead that sort of comes around the town and torments the city, torments the little town or whatnot. So there's some more noise again there. But anyway, so and then there was, of course there was Dracula, but wasn't there a counterpart to Dracula? There was a woman that was called the Countess Dracula. Is that right?
Yeah, was that Elizabeth Bathory?
Yeah, that's her.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and she used to actually bathe in blood. Yeah,
that would be really hardcore. I don't know if any isn't that, I know a little bit about the story. She was trying to be, there was like an attempt to stay youthful is what I understand, but she had killed over like 600 people, they say, and someone who worked for her was actually read her journal or something where she sort of like put down everybody she had killed. And so they said she had these vampiristic tendencies, and she was actually related to the royal family, so she didn't get prosecuted for quite some time, but eventually she was prosecuted and put up into a cell, and they blocked up the windows, and I think they said she she died like 5 years later or something like that. So,
wow.
Yeah, but I think that the idea of a vampire, you think of like, Halloween vampires and ghosts and witches. It's like that classic sort of thing that people are really into. But what we're talking about tonight, I don't think that's what we're talking about tonight, but I wanted to sort of, because when you say vampire, people immediately are gravitating towards, those stereotypical things,
Right, a black cape, pale face, fangs, greasy hair.
Yeah, everything you see every Halloween, right? Have you ever been have you ever been a vampire for Halloween?
Yeah, I think I was I remember I was at least 1 year. I was Dracula. I had the pendant and everything.
Yeah, I did it 1 year, and my girlfriend at the time did as well, and we got every 5 years, I go all out and do a costume that's sort of over the top. And so when I did vampire, when I was a vampire, I got the teeth that molded to my teeth to give me fangs, and did my makeup, sort of whitened out, and did the clothing and everything. And I think it looked really great. I had put on a wig, and I had long black hair, and she looked great. We were like this pretty awesome vampire couple at the time. And I think that's something we're going to get into that, because I think there's sort of this group of people that gravitate towards, that side of it, like the mythological vampire, and they really associate with what a vampire is,
Well, when I dressed up as a vampire, I think I was in grade school or junior high, so I was too young to have a girlfriend at the time, but it was a great costume. I did the hair, I had the pendant, the teeth, I painted my face pale, I had the cape, black pants, the whole 9 yards. Yeah,
and I think, I don't know about you, but if I were the classic vampire, you see movies like Interview with a Vampire, and there's this whole like hunting down of, your next meal. And, like Dusk Till Dawn, you've got the bar that's full of vampires and flips over in the middle of the night, and they sort of feed on everybody. So vampires have a real hardcore reputation, you know what I mean?
Right.
We're not talking about, I think that's one thing I want to get into when we bring our guest on, is just, all those things, man, that make you a vampire are not grade school sort of fun walk in the park type of things, so it's going to be really interesting. So we will be right back, and stay with us, because our guest is a real vampire from New Orleans, and I think it's going to be fascinating what he has to say.
You are listening to Spirits and More Radio. Have a paranormal story? Tell us at spooksandspirits.com.
To Spirits and More Radio. I'm joined with my co-host Eric Van Leer, and I would like to welcome to the show our guest from New Orleans tonight. And it is pretty late over there, but it's early for a vampire. we have with us the founder of the New Orleans Vampire Association. Belfazar is with us. Welcome to the show, Belfazar.
Good evening. How are everyone?
We are hanging in there.
I got that.
So, I guess a little, what we want to know, or what I think every listener out there wants to know who has no connection whatsoever to vampirism or vampire societies or vampire courts or all these sort of things that we've sort of run into. People want to know what this is about. But before we do that, I just have one question. Can you tell us how old you are?
I am 51 years old.
Okay, 51. Okay, so you are not the vampire that we see in the films. What is modern day vampirism? What is a vampire today?
Well, in New Orleans voodoo, our New Orleans vampire community, we use to define vampirism in order to figure out what a vampire is. So our definition of vampirism is someone who is born with an affliction, who cannot either create enough of the essential energies the body needs to get through the day, or cannot create any of these energies. So they got to reach for outside sources.
I see. So none of the things that are really in vampire movies really apply to the modern day vampire, or are there some things that do?
I believe there are some things that do, but not on the level that you see the fantasy makers bring to life.
Okay. When did you come to the realization that you wanted to that vampire was something you wanted to call yourself or felt that you were?
First of all, let me make it very clear. There really isn't a person who identifies as vampire who ever thought, this is what I am. It takes a bit to come to terms with. I was very lucky. Somebody saw something in me that sort of echoed her own childhood. So she took me under her wing, so to speak, and taught me to not be ashamed of it, taught me to revel in it, taught me to grow with it.
Encouraged you.
Very much so.
And what were some of the things that she saw that brought her to bring that up with you?
Well, let's start off with the backstory. I was always a sickly kid. I was short, round, and sickly. Like, round enough to have my own diameter.
Mm-hmm.
I had my own zip code. Okay?
Yes.
Now, being young, big, and sickly, while your cousins and uncles are all running around and healthy, some of them jocks, some of them preparing to be jocks. And you know what that's like. Sooner or later, the sickly one gets picked on.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what happened. And one day on a church bus that we were all forced to ride together, a couple of my uncles started messing with my sister. And I ended up just super angry. Nothing I did seemed to calm me down. So when one of my uncles shoved my sister. I jumped up and started hitting him, but he pinned my arms to my side. I did the only thing I could think of doing. And I bit. I bit through his winter coat. I bit through his sweater. I bit through his shirt. I bit through his t-shirt and into his flesh. Deep enough that I got a really good splash of blood. 74 stitches is what he got.
Wow.
That's a hardcore bite. You were extremely angry, as I think anyone would have been, really, to see a family member being assaulted in some way.
Well, what happened was the church bus lady, her name was Ashanti Whitemantle, saw what went on, and she decided she would speak to my mother. Here I'm thinking I'm getting booted off the bus. And the next thing I know, you're going to spend this much time with her a week.
Huh.
Then it became very evident that they had come up with a plan to help get me better, so to speak.
So she had some discussion with your mother, and without really much discussion with you, they had come up with an idea and told you.
I was 11 at the time.
This is what you're going to do.
I was 11 at the time. It was always good to go through the parents first.
Right. So what came next?
Next, I got introduced to my first group of vampires. You got to remember, guys, this is 76. Okay? This isn't the vampire scene that you see today. This is separated and segregated, almost family-style get-togethers.
Interesting.
So I got taken under the wing in 76. I became a full-fledged member in 78 at the age of 13.
So is this like comparable to a coven?
Comparable to a coven, except for nobody started saying this was your religion, this is the spells you need to do, this is how you need to protect yourself. But they did teach us, this is what people won't understand about you. This is what you need to do in order to keep you under control. Here, have this kind of a drink always around you just in case. We'll get you what you need for the younger members.
Wow.
So,
yeah,
there was a whole society. And
shocked.
oddly enough, communications back in the 70s and early 80s was through a certain few, let's just be honest, BDSM groups. Magazines where they would announce blood play. You're pretty sure Vampire or 5 or 10 would show up just to reach out and touch base and communicate with others.
So was that aspect of it separate from sort of the therapeutic aspect of what was happening? Clearly there was adults who saw these traits that they attributed to a group of sort of similar people, but the tie-in to the BDSM sort of scene wasn't the BDSM scene. It was just that there was that commonality of blood. Is that what you're saying?
It was only happened during events that allowed blood play.
I see.
For a vampire to get their blood, somebody has to give it up.
Now, was everyone who was involved in giving it up aware that there were participants that associated with, or let's just say vampire, did they know there were people who had this affection towards blood, or was were there participants that were sort of into the fantasy of blood play who didn't realize what was happening?
Both.
Interesting.
In all honesty, you can go out into any of our gatherings and still find people that are, oh, we know you're not real. We just love what you're doing, and it looks so real, you know. So you have those people that no matter what, they're not going to see you as what you are. They're going to see you as what they want to see you as. Because I'm pretty sure if they actually felt we were what we were, their heads would probably explode.
Right.
You know,
I agree.
They'll go to one of their churches, start into their hallelujah syndrome, say something like, "I met a vampire," and watch that head go.
Right. Right. Well, and like Eric and I were talking about this before, and if I were a vampire, in that sense that I needed that, I mean, you would think it's sort of in line with what I was thinking, that, you know, this sort of like feeding parties, you know, I wasn't thinking the sexual aspect to it, but, you know, just that there are vampires there that, you know, need the blood and group up and get what they need. Of course, I was thinking in a more sinister way, but it's not in this way. Obviously, the participants are willing.
Well, in the 78, we didn't. There was no skulking around in the dark. There was no running around bashing people on the head and hoping things would come out right.
Right.
Our leaders would do something like list blood play.
Right. Do you think that there were or are people who've come to the realization of what they need, that don't associate, for whatever reason, they don't find other people like them, and they're left to find their own way? Have you run across any people that are sort of stray vampires in that sense, that they're solo and they're taking care of their needs and however they want to, whichever way they want to?
Sadly, yes. In my honest opinion, even with the advent of the internet and things like, you can freaking Google me anywhere. I'm even on IMDb. So, with the fact that the information is out there, because some people are leery of the information, they avoid it. And in avoiding it, they turn to their own devices.
Yeah, I saw that you've written some books as well, talking about IMDb.
I've got currently 2 books out. One is a book on magical shielding techniques, protection spells, and wards. The other is a book on voodoo, New Orleans style of voodoo.
Now, would you consider yourself a voodoo practitioner first or a vampire first?
So, would I consider myself a voodoo first? I consider myself a people first.
Well, I mean, as far as your
voodoo, make no mistake, my spirituality, my voodoo path, and my physicality, my vampirism, do not coincide in anything other than the fact that I am a vampire who practices voodoo.
Okay.
And with that, we will be right back after this with more from Balthazar, a vampire in New Orleans, joining us tonight, and Eric Van Leer, our co-host.
And now it's time for Haunted Places.
Lafitte's Blacksmith Shop in New Orleans is one of the oldest structures in America to house a bar. Built in 1722, it was used as a blacksmith shop, but more so for illegal smuggling and lawlessness. Lafitte is described as a pirate of his time in New Orleans, and there are tales that he still haunts this very spot. His spirit is discussed nightly among patrons of this popular French Quarter bar. In fact, at night, Lafitte's is only lit by candlelight. With its brick-walled interior, some say the ghost of Lafitte is nothing more than your eyes playing tricks. However, a couple drinking late into the night at the bar jokingly played into the idea of meeting Lafitte, as so many others have. For them, the night ended without an inkling of the infamous pirate making an appearance. But the next day, Lafitte had a surprise for the husband, who was most skeptical. As the couple returned for a little more of the blacksmith shop's unusually creepy atmosphere, it would be during a kiss that the husband would notice something completely unexplainable. As his wife opened her eyes from the kiss, her husband said, "I saw him." Of course, she thought he must be kidding, but from the look on his face, she realized he was very shaken. He said that he saw a dark mist come through the wall and clearly materialize into a man's body, with none other than the face of Pirate John Lafitte. So the next time you're at Lafitte's blacksmith shop, don't be surprised if you're joined for a little spirits by New Orleans' favorite pirate from the past. And we are back on Spirits and More Radio, joined by Balthazar, a vampire residing in New Orleans. And where Balthazar, you pretty much have gone over your and coming into understanding the idea of vampire. Can you address, or I'm curious about the use of the word vampire? Is it the association as a vampire is simply based on Hollywood's portrayal of the undead and the need for blood and all that sort of thing? Is that right?
Originally, no. Not the Hollywood's version of the undead, but the need for blood, yes. Topics had been discussed, I guess, 30 odd years before I even became a member of the community, and terms like leeches and symbiotes was just thrown out. We kind of adopted vampire and went with it.
And is now there have, I'm just curious at what point in time you talked about your health and people showing you that consuming blood would restore your health and bring energy to you.
They didn't actually show me that. I kind of found it on my own.
They just,
after getting kicked off the Sunday school bus, I was running around with all my friends as if I'd never been sick. It like literally hit my tongue, and it was like an explosion of life. I could do things like the other kids could do. I could make snow angels. I could run. I could throw snowballs.
Now, I hate to play devil's advocate, and I mean no. How do I phrase this? Do you think that was completely because the blood had some some type of, like back in the day, they used to bathe in blood and do all that. And we've talked about OTO and how certain body fluids have, quote unquote magical properties. But do you think this consumption of the blood was 100% the blood itself, or do you think there was any part of it, however minute, that may have been somewhat psychosomatic based?
Nope. Too young to know what a psychosomatic would have done.
Okay, that's fair.
I was 11 years old.
Right.
Hadn't gotten that far in science. Let's see.
So this was...
As a matter of fact, we were just getting into, talking about flatworms and how they regrow.
So Balthazar, for you, when you tasted blood, because as a kid, I think most people have probably tasted blood, or at least their own blood, at some point.
Cut your finger, stick it in your mouth.
Right. And
with that,
so what's
ever so slow, oh shit, coming out of it. Yeah.
And I have to tell you, I have and I don't know why this is. I know I'm not a vampire for this very reason, because I get so squeamish around blood, and I have to turn my head away as they put the needle in my arm to draw the blood. I immediately just start rambling on about whatever to take my mind off it. And I think the only time
I don't get squeamish, I get hungry.
the only
Honestly, I've donated plasma. I've donated whole blood. Red Cross people used to look at me funny when I'd come in, because I'd have like a bag of peanut butter sandwiches with me, because I get hungry.
I don't get hungry, but I have to say that I can handle it under the circumstance of an emergency. If I saw someone on the side of the road bleeding to death and I could help them, I would get past it. But otherwise, I go on the verge of passing out. So blood definitely doesn't do anything for me. But what you're saying to me is, when you were 11 and you tasted blood, there was something far more to it that was just unbelievable. I mean, it sounds to me that you could compare it to, just some wonderful mental experience is what it was for you.
Now, understand, even to this day, with work by groups like the AVA, much of the information in the vampire community is anecdotal at best. It's all perceived by our own base experiments. Several of us have done the route of, am I crazy? Is this really happening to me? Here, let me go to the doctor and check me out.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
I have been diagnosed everything from prenatal vitamins to vitamin B12 shots in the ass to like triple dosing certain vitamins that are supposed to speed up your metabolism, and just don't work with me.
Do you think that with relation to, when we were talking about vampires that sort of find their own way, or people who find their own way that just have this insatiable appetite for blood? There was a case years ago in Australia in '89. I know you probably know about this, but a woman and her friends had lured someone who was a drunk guy walking home from the bar, sort of pulled up next to him and lured him to come down to the Brisbane River, and where she stabbed his neck a bunch of times, almost decapitating him. And then her friends said that it was to drink his blood. Do those sort of stories resonate or in some way represent a portion of the people out there who are just sort of lost, but that sort of lose their way in the sense of harming people as opposed to other ways to find the blood that they need to drink?
No, don't get me wrong. in every category of people on the face of the planet. You have people that go outside the norm or what would be normal for that particular group of people and accomplish things. It's not normal for a father of 3 kids to run around and kill his neighborhood's kids. Not normal for the banker to go into the bank and literally and not accidentally screw up some paperwork and cause things to happen, rob people of money. It wasn't normal for Oral Roberts in 1984 to get on his international television show and said, "Friends, send me $80 million or God's gonna call me home by June."
Right.
$20 million later, he was still on the air for another 15 years.
Yeah.
You got good and bad people in every walk of life. And not all of those bad people are crazy, and not all of those good people are sane. So you got to kind of feel them out. You really got to talk to the ones who's willing to meet you face to face in a public place so that you feel safe.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that leads us to the next thing, that you have established the New Orleans Vampire Association. And
I am one of the founding members, yes.
One of the founding members. And it sounds to me like there's a lot of, as far as the vampire community goes, it seems to me that there's so many different people and types of people, and that you must come across, everything from the person who's sort of fantasizing about a vampire lifestyle to people who fit into these different categories, which we haven't even talked about yet. Maybe you can explain the 3 or 4 different types of people that associate with the title vampire. Clearly, I think everyone listening to this show,
there are a few more than 3 or 4.
I'm sure everyone listening to this show sort of really thinks of an authentic vampire or vampirism as someone who consumes blood, which you do. But there are people who do not, who are welcomed into the community, who are coming from a different perspective than that. So maybe for our listeners, you can just sort of run through the different types of people that all come together as vampires.
Okay. I don't do this whole VC, OVC thing, okay?
I'm not familiar with what that is.
VC is the vampire community that's supposed to be offline.
Okay.
OVC is the vampire community that's online. I found it to be too divisive, so I use GVC, Greater Vampire Community. Okay. So in the Greater Vampire Community, you have several different types. You'll have those vampires that are like myself. They find they have a need to reach outside their own particular little physiological endeavors to garner energy, for a loose word, because anything we ingest becomes energy for our body to use. Then you'll have people that just like the aesthetics of vampirism. They like the clothes. They like to deck up and deck out in Edwardian, Vampirian, Victorian clothing. Then
right.
you'll have the lesser end of that, which, I mean, you'll see some amazing costumes come out of the Edwardian, Victorian period when you go to a vampire ball. But you'll also see, oh look, they went to Hot Topic, didn't they? I know that's a lip surface jacket. I wore it 5 years ago. Things like that. And in all honesty, you'll have people that are strictly in it because they like the aesthetic of it and will role play a character, it becomes very much like they're acting out a different person, like from the game Vampire the Masquerade.
Sort of a social release for them, a way to be someone different than who they are.
A way to be someone different from who they are, supposedly without being judged by others who are out there being different. Don't always work that way, sadly. Some of the people in the community are real assholes. There's no other way to get around that. They are just straight up and up assholes and will rip you for anything they do not feel represents them specifically.
I see. We are talking vampires, and we will be right back.
Spirits and More Radio. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram.
You are listening to Spirits and More Radio, and we are live on the air right now with Balthazar, vampire from New Orleans, and Eric Van Leer, our co-host tonight. It's been an eye-opening conversation with Balthazar, to be honest with everybody. Balthazar, can you were just telling us about the different types of people that associate with being a vampire, and that there's some people who sort of judge and so forth. Is there, now you run an association, so everyone is welcome, I assume. Is there sort of a hierarchy in place that if you drink blood, you're maybe at the top, and if you're something else, you're lower than that? I mean, is that just, people tend to do that sort of thing?
Anybody who promotes those hierarchies are full of crap.
I see.
I'm sorry to you people who do this, but I think you're full of crap. I've always thought you were full of crap, and you should have been told you were full of crap when you were putting those together. Feed types are feed types. That's the only thing that solely generates its own specific force in the drama of the community. You know, you'll see role player A, B, and C walking with real vampire D and E, and they're having a great time, not knowing that real vampire D and E are sanguines. Real vampires F and J, yeah, we're skipping E because he's on the sideline watching the whole shit. You'll see these other vampires come into play, and they're psychic vampires, and because they don't drink blood, they may snub their noses at the sanguine vampires. But let's be really truthful here. You got a whole lot of snubbing going on in the community, all based on feed type.
Now, with these, I assume there's other vampire associations across the country.
There are.
Now,
New Orleans is unique in its own because we set up our council as a round table.
Mm-hmm.
Each member of the council gets to bring projects to the table. Everybody votes on the projects based on information gathered and spoke on. Everybody gets a say in the council.
Mm-hmm.
Some need to learn a little, to speak a little less and say a little more.
Mm-hmm.
But in all honesty, that's in every way of life.
Yeah. Does this include, without having a strong connection or any connection to this, to the vampire community, I've heard of vampire courts, and I think that that's shocking to the average listener to think that there's this alternate society of people that actually hold a court. Can you tell us about that?
Having survived a couple of those, I could. Survived in the barest sense of the words. They were drama-filled and did more to hurt the community than anything else. Such as, here in New Orleans, when a certain person wanted to establish a halo down here, he wanted a court down here, he didn't go to any of the established houses and talk with them. He didn't invite them in at all. He just set up his own thing. And then he put somebody else in charge of it, and that person started doing what we used to call blood hunts.
What is a blood hunt?
A blood hunt is just a way to shame another vampire out of the community. No more, no less.
Now
you get people to try to start drama with them until they just either back out of the community or they bend over and start following your set of rules.
Mm-hmm. Now, with these associations, are there any initiations or rituals that go on?
That goes house by house. In all honesty, that goes house by house. Mm-hmm. House of Mystic Echoes, my own personal house, does have initiations for those who feel that they want to make it more their proper home.
Right.
The initiations do not cost anything except for the person has to get their own basic hotel room where I can come in, do all the prayer work, light all the candles, say the same prayers that were prayed over me when I did it when I was 11 years old, because I used my very first family's guidelines.
So these prayers are well established prayers, and there isn't, you said before that sort of a vampire or anyone's religious take on life can be completely separate from their need to consume blood or in a way be a psychic vampire or any of the other various ways that people feed off energy.
Well, understand, when I first got into the vampire community, we didn't focus on feed types. We knew there were alternative feed types. We knew there were different ways for people to, for lack of a better word or phrase, garner their energies. What we focused on was the commonalities. Why did we feel that we were a vampire? Why did we feel that this was even a part of us?
Right. Is there a place for someone, maybe someone who's listening to this show right now that has found that they have a fondness for blood or just a straight up need for it, and that it enhances their life, but just doesn't want to take into this, what you described, the community and the courts and the houses and even the whole idea of vampirism, or the word vampire, for fear of black capes and fangs and all those sorts of things that greater society understands to be a vampire. Is there a place for someone like that who just doesn't find themselves fond of vampire?
There are several places they can go to get information. Sadly, we lost one of our matriarchs in the community, and yes, I say matriarch because she was mom to a lot of us. When we had problems, we turned to her. So we lost one of the matriarchs, but her website, sanguinarius.com, is still up and running, and it's being run by people who would leave it as she left it, or add to it as she would have.
And is that website?
So you have sanguinarius.com. You have Sphinx Cat's old site. Sorry, Sphinxy. Just in case you're listening.
So these are places that someone can go who recognizes the fact that they have this hunger for blood. We haven't gotten into where big groups. You're talking about the blood was brought to you as a child, but where does the blood come from? Is it animal blood? Is it human blood?
Understand, my grandmother was a little old Jewish woman. Okay? So she would get blood from me when it wasn't from people from the kosher butcher down the block. I found pig's blood to be too salty. Chicken blood, bland. Beef blood tasted the best, and mixed with a Merlot nicely.
I have a question real quick.
I have a lot of questions too.
This might sound like a crazy question, but is there? I just heard like a voice. Is there someone else in the background, or was that like a disembodied voice?
That's one of my cubs.
Okay.
What is a cub? What do you mean, one of your cubs?
Well, here in New Orleans, I'm called Daddy Wolf. So the ones that come under my jurisdiction aren't under my wings. They are my cubs.
So this is some other person who is a vampire that is part of your house.
Working to be that.
I see. Can you? I said I had a lot of questions. How much blood do you consume in a period of?
Honestly,
yeah. What is?
Understands. My physicality is affected by two things: how physically active I am and how spiritually active I am. Remember, I am a voodoo priest too, and I do readings for people through Voodoo Authentica in the heart of the French Quarter. So, depending on how spiritually active I am and how physically active I am, I can be sated with 1 ounce, basically a shot glass full of blood. But at my most hungry is usually 6 ounces.
And
however, it was up before that. With age and practice, I find I can hone in on what it is that I need more, so I take less.
I see. Now you had said the different types of blood taste differently. We've all had a rare steak. Can you? I mean, is human blood better than everything else?
Human blood is my optimal choice because of one primary reason. A human can say no. A human being can physically say, no, I do not feel like doing this tonight, because I am a respecter of my donors.
Wow.
I see. Is there So animal blood, I'm just trying to gather that in because it's from someone completely outside of vampirism. It would seem that there's...
Well, here's an example. Like when I went and shot my first deer, all of the original Red Dawn, the people I was with had this little ritual where if you killed the deer, you got the first cup of blood. Well, I drank that whole cup of blood, did not get sick, and everybody was looking at me like, what?
Yeah.
They expected me to get sick. Here's the thing. In a true sanguine vampire, blood does not have an emetic effect.
Wow.
Are you saying that you can't get sick from blood?
You can get sick from anything, but I'd probably have to drink close to a half a gallon before it started wanting to chug itself back up. I can't even drink a half a gallon of chocolate milk without it wanting to chug itself back up.
Right. Is there, I just have to ask, do you know of any vampires that sort of put themselves in relationships with people specifically because they feel like the person would be open to donating blood to them?
I've seen it happen, but generally I don't do this. The man who shares my bread is not the man I break in bread.
Mhm.
I have 4 different donors. 3 of them are guys. They're all straight. 1 of them is a girl. And all of them go back home to their significant others when I'm done.
Now, how is the blood actually obtained? What method is used?
Easiest way to see that would be Vampires New Orleans episode 3. It's on YouTube. I know it's on YouTube. That's the easiest way to see it. I take from the body, period. Dr. John Edgar Browning came up with a wonderful synopsis on why I may do this. And it all stems back to that first bite.
And
You think something in that triggered my desire to take it straight from the source.
So in the sense of, you're not talking about with fangs.
No. Fangs cause too much of a rip.
So is it a cut? People cut themselves?
People cut themselves, or if they're too squeamish, I cut them.
I see. What is in it for the donor? Do they come from a place of compassion, or you talked about that there's these people that go home to their spouses? I assume that you're insinuating that their spouses have no idea that they are seeing you and giving to you.
Oh no. I meet the spouses too. I meet the significant others too. I don't do anything behind anybody's back.
I see.
This ain't the creep show.
Right.
TLC had nothing to do with my song, baby.
I guess I'm just struggling to find where what couple would come in. Does it go back to the BDSM community? Is that sort of the group of people who are most likely to participate?
No, but I think that somewhere along the lines, if the donor is attached, there is that element of either free love or shared love. So they might be in an open relationship, or they might be in a shareable relationship. But since I'm not exacting sex from them, it kind of leaves me a little free to do some other things.
Wow, this is fascinating.
Yeah, I think that neither Eric nor I were expecting to hear anything that you said tonight, to be honest. I think it's all brand new.
What did you expect?
It's
blah, blah, I want to suck your...
Well, when you know, I mean, as we talked about in the beginning of the show, all we know is what we see on TV and in the movies, and that there's this entire group of people, and clearly not even, I mean, we can honestly say that this is a worldwide group of people who share this commonality of needing energy and blood, and that
I know people from India, from Russia, from Czechoslovakia, Poland, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia. I know people from Zambia. I know people from all over. They understand this is not just the United States is such a freaking place. Let's go see.
right.
Yeah,
They have caught on bigger here at first, but I think that all had to do with three things. One, we already had secret societies of vampires in the United States. Two, and love it or hate it, it was a true factor in the community. A game created called Vampire the Masquerade.
How did that play into what is a physical and what seems to be a natural need for people to cross over into games?
The game creators, such as Mark Brainhagen, traveled to the different little groupings of vampires at the time. And trust me, we were little groupings of vampires at the time. The most established group at that time was floating around a club called Mothers. All hail Mothers. And in all honesty, New York was the birth of the current scene, but it exploded like wildfire, and I don't think they knew how it was going to explode. Too many people tried the New York thing in their areas, and it just didn't work. New Orleans being one of those. We got burnt by 4 different New York style courts in a row. The last one was by a woman named Lady Kim.
Is this
bloody run the vampire community here in New Orleans to the ground?
Balthazar, real quick, I just want to interrupt you. Is this tied to, because when I first heard about vampires societies was back in the 90s, there was a show, and I can't say whether it was 2020 or 60 Minutes, but I want to say it's one of those two, and they portrayed this scene, and I believe it was in New York City, where there were groups of people, and they portrayed it as a role play, that there were houses and groups, and they would sort of do this real life vampire fantasy gaming. Is that tied to what you're talking about? It sounds like, because I'm picking up that may be the same group of people, but portrayed in a completely different way from reality.
Oh, they were definitely portrayed in a completely different way from reality.
Now, I want to segue real quick, just for 1 second.
God, I love that word.
This question's been on my mind. What do you say to the people that have the stigma that voodoo is quote unquote evil?
Eric just totally changed the topic on us, by the way. And
I noticed.
and I want to say for the first time ever.
But I will honestly say, Voodoo believes there is only one creator God. Doesn't matter what form of voodoo you practice. And we're using voodoo as a blanket term, like Christian. Okay? You know, you have Episcopals, you have Methodists, you have 306 different versions of Baptist. So voodoo being a blanket term, covering things like Santeria, Candomblé, Paula Lacume, Mayumba, Kimbanda, Umbanda, Obia, all of these things that stemmed up from the literal Caribbean roots of the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
All of them believe there is only one creator God, and that God has several spirits that he's created to help them get from point A to point B in their daily lives while he oversees the whole universe.
Right. Okay.
Is there I'm sorry for doing this, but I want to completely change the subject right back to where we were. Eric is involved with the occult, by the way, and he's I think it's Eric's fascination with that probably had him wondering something about.
Well, Eric, we can talk on that on another show if you want.
Yeah, we can do another show on that. But I think
I'm willing. I don't know where your prior vampire flitted off to, but I'm willing.
Absolutely.
Yes, Wandy, I'm calling you out.
So we were talking about how the New York scene was portrayed at some point in time back in the 90s, and that was not reality. And that scene, as you said, sort of kicked off everything and related to
portrayed it there. It was like sex on steroids with plastic fangs.
Right.
And that's just not the way it was. It was one of the first meet and greets. So everybody was trying to get their feet under them, let everybody else know where they were from, how they could get a hold of them. You know, we were actually starting to reach out. And then along comes this young man named Aaron Todd Hoyt, who is now known as Father Sebastian, by the way. Aaron Todd Hoyt had an ingenious idea. He decided he was going to run parties specifically for vampires. Vampires, vampire enthusiasts, lifestylers, role players, it didn't matter who you were. So he gave us our first places to get together.
So those were parties that everyone participated in, whether it be role players or whatnot. But you know, when you talked about when you were a kid, it sounds like there was this well-established group of people that really recognized the differences in people who had this affliction towards blood. So is this, I guess I'm struggling to understand sort of how everything blew up.
There were two major influences in my coming to where I am today. The first major influence was my first affiliation, my first group. They were called the Shadows Council. From what I understand, they were created in the 1930s. I came into play in the 1970s, 76, 77, 78. By 78, I was a full member. 13 years old. That was fun.
So you're saying that there, as far back as 1930, people had formed clearly secret society. There was not, at that point in time, there couldn't be any. I can't imagine what it would be like to be in 1930.
Understand, witches feared us, thinking we were always going to suck away their magic when that's nothing we wanted to do. 90% of the vampires of that time acknowledged being a healer protector by nature. You had some that were just healers, some that were just protectors, but the rest of us identified as healer protectors. Myself included in that. So, here we are running around trying to heal things, and the first thing that happens is Witchy Poo number 3 screams at Witchy Poo number 5 because she finds out that the person who's supposed to be Witchy Poo number 4 is a vampire. So it got us kicked out of several different magical circles, magical workings.
Completely misunderstood. And even at that time in the 30s, witches themselves weren't socially acceptable. I mean, I can imagine the Christian community would come down hard on anyone who stepped outside that realm of belief system.
Yeah, well, don't forget, you also had your little gypsy shops with readers in the windows. Right.
Is there, how far back do vampire societies go that you're aware of? You mentioned 1930s, but is there anything further back than that maybe traveled across from Europe when people...
In all honesty, some of the paperwork I read in my first hinted at 1611 hardcore. I don't know what was going on in 1611. I haven't bothered to talk to any of those people in years. I don't even know if they're still around. But 1611 was a big thing in a lot of writings.
When you say you haven't talked to those people, you're not referring to people from 1611, clearly.
No. I'm soon to be 52. That's not an issue. And I have yet to figure out how to time travel, or I'd correct a couple of mistakes.
Is there, I'm just guessing that there's a possibility that in Europe, there's no question in my mind, based on what you're saying, that there's this very significant group of people that have existed for some time. And I'm just wondering, is there, sort of hereditary things? Do you think that your family in the past, someone carried these same traits and it's been passed on to you? Because if that's true, then vampirism in the sense that people gain energy from consumption of blood and various other ways has always been with us.
That's just it. It has always been with us. My great-grandfather was a full-blood Cherokee medicine man. He used to tell me a story, and I got it on my Facebook page in my notes section. I'll have to add you as a friend so you can see it. But he basically said that during the long night, when man was young, man feared the noises in the night. They feared the creatures of the night. The sharp claws that would come scraping. The sharp teeth that would snatch away a child. The howls, the growls, So they prayed. They prayed to the Earth Mother and the Sky Father. And during that prayer, the Earth Mother stepped down and began to walk among them and listen to their fears. She called down the Sky Father, and he came down, walked among the people for a while, spoke, found the fears, and came up with a plan. They would take tribesmen of every tribe, but it would make a new tribe, a tribe that would have to be protected during the daylight hours, since they would be the protectors during the night. Tribe would come back with different needs. And they were warned these needs would not seem normal. So, after a turn of Sister Moon, the Sky Father and the Earth Mother came back with the new tribe and told all of the others that they were bonded with the magics of the Sky Father and the Earth Mother, the nature of the man around them, and the soul of the beast.
And was it, so if I understand you correctly, was this passed from you said your great grandfather? Are these writings that were passed to you from him?
Stories. Just stories. I did write it out as best I could remember. You can see it.
What do you, for people listening to this, what do you want people to know about vampires? Or vampirism? What's the one thing you want people to take away from this show?
1. Vampirism is a physiological condition. Much like eye color, hair color, size, and weight, it's there. There's not a whole hell of a lot any of us can do about it, except learn to come to terms with it, learn to deal with it better, and therefore deal with the world around us better. 2. Because it's a physiological condition, we're not freaks, we're not geeks, we're not monsters that go bump in the night. Most of us hold day jobs. Friend of mine, actually 4 friends of mine are teachers in schools. 3 friends of mine are behind the pulpits. 2 friends of mine work on police forces. We are what we are. And just like you, we have to earn a living. So remember, and it sounds so damn cliche, we're all around you.
Balthazar, thank you for being on this show. I think neither Eric nor I expected it, and this is the first time we've ever gone 24 minutes over our show time, and there was no way I was going to press stop. Thank you for being on the show. We may have an opportunity to have you on in the future and dive into voodoo, as Eric seems to have an interest in that, and I think that would be that'd be fascinating as well. I really appreciate your time. And I think that this show is going to be an eye-opener for anyone who hears it. And just fascinating that that this society exists. And it sounds like there's a lot of... it's a multifaceted...
Don't forget,
community.
You've got people like Dr. D.J. Williams, who studied us. You've got Dr. Joseph Laycock that have studied us. You have Dr. Joseph Browning that have studied us. John Edgar Browning. Sorry, John. But you've had people study us. They've walked into our community. They studied us. They know we're not out here trying to, be all world dominatory. They know that we just want to be out here and live our lives just like everybody else. They know we vote. They know we pay our taxes. And they know we have dreams.
And with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to end tonight's broadcast. Once again, thank you, Belvazar. We will certainly
Very welcome.
Have the talk again. Eric, thank you for being on the show and adding to it. And thank you for listening to Spirits and More Radio. You can get everything on spiritsandmoreradio.com, listen to past episodes, as well as see any links. And we will get that from Belfazar, any sort of links that he thinks would be interesting for anyone who's curious about learning more about the vampire community, as well as anyone who may believe that they fit within the vampire community and want to reach out to him. So we'll certainly put that on the website, and we will see you next time.